Alright, see Lama Chöpa, kissing that Lamalia, so the Kenan Lama, Lamasina, Kurai, Idam Sina, Kurai, and then Chigon, Nichi Kandrosina, Lama Kurai, and then Chigon Lama Kurai, Chesa, that Lama Gemni Kuni Yungo in City Lamalia, and Dustine, so Puzu the Tep. And Delatine, and then Lamu Kusun to Sumle, and the Versa. Gaboda, Marboda, ne Tingasum, and Rimshin Juada, and Jixer to Rimshin Rangi, near some Tim, and it's a Jixer to Junera, Rang near some tissue the Tim Biggie, all those tin Mevach in the Tim Bigger, one she number double Toson and Sempegi, and Jim Mevach, on to Sinikis in that you or Mazu tissue Savare.
Good evening. So in our previous classes, 3 weeks ago, we looked at the 53rd verse. And it starts with, "You are my guru, you are my yidam, you are the dakinis and dharma protectors." And there, in this verse, we recognize how our lama is in nature our yidam, our dakinis and dharma protectors, indivisible, inseparable. And thereafter, 2 weeks ago, we looked at the next verse, the 54th verse, where one receives the 4 initiations with visualizing light rays coming from the 3 places of our Lama. First, white from the crown, the om on the crown of his head, then red from the throat, his throat, and then blue from the hung at his heart, and then all 3 together. And in this way, one receives the 4 initiations, together with obstacles being purified, and the imprints to attain the 4 kayas are received. So that's what we looked at in our previous times together.
On the days of the Angelia, and Lama Chöpa, and the Lamalia Sodip, she had a tower, that Gangeli. Lama Chöpa Soshin sat up to tell a Yala Dumbucone and the Chopa for La Sobada, and to Shin and dinner, let me go soon to Indian debut, Jambuton, Lama Sodipshi, and so did or Dibado, that Dibado did to Savare.
Prior to this, that was the conclusion of a particular section where one made supplications through recalling the vast array of qualities of our teacher, as well as his incomparable kindness. And each time, through each of these verses, from verse 43 to 52, we recalled his qualities and kindness and made supplications. Prior to this, there was an extensive presentation on the 7 limbs, and prior to that, the 7 limb prayer was the establishment of the visualization over many verses. Then prior to that were the preliminaries of refuge, bodhicitta, encompassing reflections on bodhicitta and emptiness. So that's what we have looked at thus far in the preceding 54 verses.
Alright, the names are Lama Chöpa, so Puja, that the Tibetan San and Tiparadilia. And
then normally, following the 54th verse, is the offering of, or making of offerings, or the talk offering. That usually is what will follow from having received the 4 initiations.
And Puja need Puja, Tommy Duniki, Sikala, Nambin, Lusigua, Tenshu couple of Puja, Jorova, Digalia, Puja, Tommy Dunia said 6 dinners to a Tommy Dunia, the Pichigalia, Lama Chöpa, Tommy Dunia, kissing out the Tivashawa, said Jorova, or did in my dead Sikala. Chazawa Cho, Dipa Shavasa, Tomed in the Migitibile Sage. Did it Kuni Lama said, the Gangalia, Tomed in the Migitibile, Gidan is a Yurachishipa said, Tang Tang is danger. Did you order 1 mile of the Ganglias? The Gangalia in the 1 mile. Diva Shabachi. The Yala Dunin and Diva Shabachi chart. 어디 제자 디버샤 와서 토메드니 미기 디벨에서 저라 찍지 dinmaji di on maji dinma dyen de karsan sabgi chugi chaba abdu sol se dua sikti dinmaji le dyene da tomi dyne ma sam dan ma se chikashi jela chikji ni sumgi jela gardo sabgi chugi chaba abdu sol se dua chaba abdu sol se di don sane dene lamik tenshu pubi kablo chopuya di del pugore chopu sane dene dorji kula kishi minga yasen dungore je lamik tenshu kablo lamale tenshu kablo chopuya jorwa dene sabgi chugi chaba abdu so se dungurwa di don sane dene de chopuya re dene chopu kandro je lamala kandro tenshu kya jorwa odi dibara de chigore tenshu kya chobe ani dene dorji kula kishi minga dungore then ani riksa kasati and sebe hagu gore dene
So if one is performing the Lama Chöpa in the context of a long life puja, then between the 40th and 41st verses, the requesting to teach and requesting to remain within the 7 prayer, that is where the long life puja would be offered. So this is something Untitled has a lot of knowledge on. I was a little confused. The Tibetan doesn't have verse numbers, so I had no idea where Genla was, but Tsepel would have understood for sure.
And jisoda ande 당은저 댄슈기 부야디 초부의 댄슈 간도 대가지 차저로 안 디스 산삼디 될지 거래.
And that additional part for the long life puja would have included the dakini dances, so that would have all come in there between the 40th and 41st verse.
당은저대 라마야 소립제사는 안다 인마 카르레라네 지 라마야 소립제선 다 소소게 냠는 제와 줘로 받아 대지다딩 안도 라마도 소립제딘 지다 라마로 소립제나 안 소소게 냠는 지고 라미바 두수 제세 간나게 당아서 제오로 받아 다 냠는 제마 안된마 두스제네다 지게 냠술리 하게 좀 받아 된마 순고래.
Following having made the supplications from verses 43 to 52, supplications to our Lama, receiving blessings and inspiration from him, culminating verses 53 and 54. Then, having made these supplications and requests, we come to can be expressed as the main part of the practice, which is now to receive those teachings and to reflect on them, to integrate them in oneself, or to use the word Geshe used, to practice them. And practice literally in Tibetan means to gain experience of. So now we come to that main section, which is to gain experience of the Lamaram path.
지게 계획신이 그신 다 검자들과 계획신도 검야다 안델이야 아니 지금 다 로장소기 림바 되게 마 로장소 림바 되게 마슈에 되는 자다 되는 마 당보 그런 땅아서 렘림나라 지바래 다 렘림나라 땅아서 냠는 지당보 네 계획신 전소 검야 지간라 진대네 기부 안니까 소리 기부 중요함이 림바 그 치워미 가소리 된주기 denju denje samna da jurwa denju limbo denje bor samda da komya da dene kibu chungyo lam yirim ba komya dine jinge lam yirim ba komya dine kibu chembe lam yirim ba komya ani kibu modus chene sungorwa dina shen dina jibar ma da na sun komje nyamlen che da rimba ma da deji de lamal ya dinye le yang zu ge soshen sa da lama ya chego puya da so so digbe sha je da dine jig lamal ya an so dip che ba je je wa da je san da manzu je san da lami gi ma tu kana gi azu nyamne gar gar chi osen rimba tang bo de ji ni ba de so ba ji di shi tu sin nyamne rimba chi wa da dine ma da komje rimba dine ma sung hore.
What the Lama Chöpa practice is itself a mirror, perhaps, a reflection of how one engages in one's own daily Lamaram meditation. So first, there's the setting of the scene, where one generates the appropriate motivation, visualization. Then one engages in accumulation of merit. This was the extensive 7-limb prayer, as well as purification within there, and then makes supplications to one's Lama by recalling his kindness and qualities. And thereafter, one engages in a glance meditation on various points of the Lamrim, in accordance with first a practitioner, or the trainings of a practitioner of initial capacity, such as reflecting on a precious human rebirth, the impermanence of life, and so forth. Thereafter, reflecting on the trainings that are shared with a practitioner of intermediate capacity, followed by the trainings that are uncommon, or those specific to a practitioner of greatest capacity. So this is the way that one would engage in a glance meditation on the Lamrim every day. And here in our Lama Chöpa, it's presented just in a more elaborate version.
That's it in Marawa. And Shincho Dambachis in Lamala, Chujin Gubi, Sova Debi, Deleza Combo, Kiniki, Kishin Chisu Timberjin Love Setting.
This then brings us to the 84th verse. I've lost my place, but you'll know where that is. The 84th verse. Through the power of having made offerings and respectful requests to you, holy venerable gurus, supreme field of merit, protectors and root of well-being and bliss, please bless me to come under your joyful care.
That is Tigi, Lamrim Chevenada, the Kivishin, the Sukomyati, Disungore.
This then is in terms of the layout from the Lamrim. This is then reflecting on the meditating on the Lama.
Singal Matapchi, Singane Haki, and Singa Deletine, Tendo Chuching has a long joke side to Diragorova, the Sing said, Singa said. That then as the Sing Chok said, the Sing said, as the Sunam Sapi Sing Seor, and as the Kawa Sunams and the Kawasayaki, Sing Lumasona, Sukaresene, Sing Choto Cupade, Lama Res, Rank Lama de Res, or that, Chesanga to Sunam Sayaki, Tanga to Tendo of the Sing Lumasona, Singana, Shinting as the Sunam di Kawa de Yoya de Suzal Lamasel Yunko, Chesan Lamasane, Kawa Sayaki, Sunam Sayaki, Choto Cupadi, and Lama Res, Sing Chok, said Lama de Res. Chesanga to Sunam Sayaki, Kawa Sayaki, Sulitin Yungos, Lama Litin Saku Hores, Chesanda di Lama din Sayaki, Sunam Sayaki, Sing Yu, Choto Yuba, Sulit Surias and Lama de Res, or the Sunam Sayaki, Sing Yu Choto Yuba de Lama Res.
In the English, we start with the second line, and the last part of it, supreme field of merit. So what we have translated here as field is the first syllable of a merit field, but it's actually, in Tibetan, it's the first syllable of the word for a forest. So then Genla is saying that a forest is where traditionally people would go to get food and other resources. It would be a resource-rich environment. So we could imagine a field in a similar way being a place where one would gather food, a place that is rich in resources. But amongst all the fields or forests of resources, the very supreme one is what we are approaching here, like this. So amongst the various fields and forests, the one that we are approaching is in order not to gain material resources, but merit. So the resource that we're seeking in this field or forest is that of virtue, of merit. And amongst the varying fields or forests, the supreme one is that of our Lama. Through accumulating virtue, through supplicating our Lama, through relying on our Lama, relying on his teachings, integrating his teachings, through relying on that supreme field, vast stores, incomparable stores of merit are accumulated.
Sunam saying also Kawa Sago, Kawa Lagorvata, Kawa Saya Delia, Yu Mongboyorva, then you Chiki Chedin, Kora Korine, 최딘 딩아주 개와사의 유착으로와 개와사의 신으로와 개와사의 신서다 텔라틴의 개와사여로와 안에 직구 구인나 공바다 안디 멤비게다 저게 셰리아 안에 지그 미치 짐바다들 지로체베네 개와사 시한데네 개와사고로 지쳐사다 저게 개와사의 신을 차더로 신스의 개와사의 유 신스의 개와사의 유디로와다 신 돈돌마서 계게 신가나신 돈도게 신가들의 신가모 르망고로 가시 도 망고여 되게 돈나시라 끼마든 끼요발 뉴뉴마데 맞죠 가시를 야구견 가시 빼고 기디나 야구게 되게 가시 로직 야구 로직을 야구 맞게 되는 용구로 신가를 담아라요로 디나 신가주 개와서 유디라야 망고요로 베네 아주 가사 마연 경기 띠 그서 최대한 아니지 네 자친보다 니네 때는 아주 개와사도 제사지소야 개와사의 유리에 안디냐 신가주 계신 안지미다 눈로나 대솔야 로바체 판바체바나 안 대솔 때는 아주 개와사고래 대소야 아주 개와사의 유체고래 안나 지금 다 저게 개뷰 라 상유 권조 최고 권조 사다 개뉴 권조 사다 대소양 저게 다 저게 개와사의 유로와 지선 개뷰 개와서 유리 개와사의 신리 디나신 아주 라마디아 아주 개와사의 신리 지선 아주 개와사의 유들이야 신갈마선에 돈도답세 신갈마선 빼 망고 휴요로 받아 디나신 아주 개와사의 유들에 망고 요레스 이나 디나네다 약쇼도 초도 규바서 약쇼 세계로와 나랑 저 개와사에게 약쇼도 수레스는 나랑 라마디레 해서다 신촉해야 돼.
Just to correct firstly an error that I made before, so this word "shing" is actually the first syllable of the word for field rather than forest. So that was my error, but the analogy still is the same. So here the merit field that one is going to, or this particular field, is one that we're going to for merit, for virtue. So this field is an object through which virtue and merit is accumulated. It's one of many. For example, a stupa, this is circumambulated in order to accumulate virtue. So it is an object that through which one accumulates virtue. If one, for example, makes offerings to statues or sponsors statues, the statue too is an object through which one accumulates virtue. The practice of generosity, whether to the 3 jewels, whether to offering service to the Dharma center, to people, to animals, these are all utilizing objects in order to create virtue. So too, if one goes on pilgrimage, those places are also objects of virtue. So amongst all of these wide variety of objects through which, or by means of which, one accumulates merit, accumulates virtue, the supreme is the field of merit. The supreme field of merit is our Lama. The next word in the Tibetan then we have as holy. It also can be translated as sacred, but the meaning is of great value, or is precious. So our Lama is not only likened to the supreme field of merit, but of great value, precious.
수수랑 개와사의 신 개와사의 유 초도 교바데 라마 결혼에 제사다 초도 교바다 담바다 디 라마 지선 라마 결혼에 해서지 다도나 즉 뒤전에 도나 뒤전에 제리다.
In brief, the meaning of for us the second line is that you are Lama, you are the supreme field of merit for us, and you are precious, and you are precious and venerable. So that, in brief, is the meaning of the first line in the Tibetan.
dine samnyo da sosora de gidine sosora de yaksho sigur da sosora lama inza yaksho re gurbe de yaksho imbi gymsen ga re sa ji tang zo gymsen samda de yaksho imbi gymsen ga yo re sa gymsen ro simju ro je wo ba da.
For the meaning of the Dharma to really transform us, we need to rely on reasons. It needs to make sense to us, and thereby integrate it. So here, we need to establish what is being asserted here with reasonings, because if the Lama is the supreme field in which one accumulates merit, well, people have different Lamas. So is each one of each Lama for each individual the supreme field of merit? So there are therefore many, many different supreme fields? That seems a little strange. So to overcome such doubts and to be able to really integrate the understanding, we need to use reasons.
야가당 군이 야도 지에 가르는 신게 될때는 돈도 야고 돈도 멍부 제부 멍부 야고 기위나 디네 게디나 로착신 지부 야고 슈기기요바네 신게데 야고레시거와 가서는 될때네 돈도데 배 야고 하나 멍부 하나 게디나 로착신 되네게 야고 기위요 저 신게데 야고레스 다 신게데 직딜래야 직돈다 얘기나 되스 뉴뉴를 게다 안 지부나 야고를 맞아요 로직을 야고 요로직을 야고 얘기면 신간이 있나네 그디나 망부게다 야고게다 지관게디 신가디 야가데서 그러가서 대부 야가 연구해 봐서 신가디 야도 기시로 어디나 신당 알아서 라마딜래야 야도 기시 디나지 삼다이로 신가야 디신가 약보르지 신가 약보라 요 말세 지어로와 디 가리고네 지어로서는 사지 개치충이 기기바시고 말와 디나 신가들 답네 돈도 같이 야가 기기는 망부게나 약부게나 로가마게와 로제마야 디나 지기기네 신가디 약보레서 그러와 신가들이 돈도 기 맞답이 기디걸로 뉴뉴마도 마게와지 아니 게와네 제부디게 약보시라메 되겐 아니 로딜라 야고 로제마 야고메디 유네마키와 되는 요나 신경이디 약도 걸스거스는 돈도 약보기에다 제부 약보 요야 로딱바 지과 약보기에는 신가디 야가레스 그러와 이 신가 약도 셔야디 그런기 때 될 기비 제부 약도를 봐 야가 연구해 받는 신가디 야가레스 제부도 약보 연구면은 약보 연구 신가 될 때는 신가디 됐겨와레스네 약도 캐바디 시그러와
So we take to start with an analogy of two farmers' fields. So if one were to say which of these two is better, it would be mistaken to rely on the size of the land or perhaps the reputation of the particular area or land. Rather, one would look at the quality of crop that is produced, as well as over a period of time, whether each year a field is consistently good, as opposed to another field which sometimes produces an abundance, but at other times produces very little. And then one would be able to compare and say, of these two fields, this one produces the greatest result, and consistently so. And in that way, one would differentiate between the two fields, as which is of better quality and which is not so.
디나싱아 저기 개와사사기 유디야 다 초도 교바다 딜레드스 지켜봐 야가를 야도 켜봐셔야지 그래서네 내려때네 개와 개체와다 망고사 사규바나 용구에네 디 개와사 유디 야가로 와 단 지딜레드네 유디 개와사규바나 다 지단사 개와사규바나 개와 개체보다 망고사 투면에 용구메바나 다 딩이나네 지디 야가 지구로와 지다 디인자 아저 라마델라 때네 개와 개체와다 개와 망하다 개와 초도 유바 라마데 때네 사투고레스 지다 당한 저 최진로 고라겐 델라데네 개와 사이고르데 네 라마라 때네 개와 사바나진 최진 델라데네 개와 사투고 말해야지데 지다 디네자 저 라마데 개와 사야기 나네 안 초도 유바레야지.
Similarly then, when one looks at the virtue that is accumulated in relation to relying on the field of merit, that is one's teacher, or that object rather, let's say that, in relying on the object through which one can accumulate virtue, that is one's Lama, as opposed to any of that long list I mentioned earlier, such as a stupa, where one can circumambulate. Both then are objects through which the practitioner accumulates virtue. But to see which one is a supreme field in which virtue is accumulated, one would look at the result that follows. And the result that follows from, for example, circumambulating a stupa or relying on a teacher is incomparable. The amount and the quality of virtue that's created in relation to one's teacher is incomparably more than any other virtuous object.
gyuden kinji le tine yungore gyuden kin me bala ane ligo mare jero chesa da gyuden kinji garela na da gyuden gyu mangbu kin gyu mangbu yebena da da gyu zo de rangel lama le tine yungore res chesa de lang yungore res chesa dine za lama le tine gyu sa gore gewa de sa gore res.
All virtue, all merit is accumulated in dependence on causes and conditions. That is how merit is accumulated. It is, you could say, it is only accumulated in dependence on causes and conditions. And a vast number of causes and conditions are required in order to accumulate merit. And amongst those, the primary cause is one's teacher.
Then I also let Digi go or Wadang. Chesan Digi go and then Digu Gewa de Sao or Reserva. Chesanda, that Digi de la Yang again, Sedigi, Desi, some, and then Chikewa Chimi Digi, and the Tarbato Kasori, Tarbek Tarbada, Dewa Chodu Yuba, and the Dinani Kasori, Dingi Dewa Tarbatoya, Delea, and Jiggy. Tarbanane Gawana Chodu Yuba and the Sanjiko Montoya. She's not Sanjiko Montoya. The nigger Tobiagi, Gudi Kawasa, and the Jebu de la Grasne, Sedile Digi, Kawachima Digi, Dingi Digi, Tarba, and Dilega, and Sanjiko Montoya Tarba, Chodu Yuba, Sanjiko Montoya, Digi, Dewa Digi, 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 did Nanzo Gugor, did Duella, Desuyan. Gyudan kin le tin desu gyudan kin de garasen gyawasa bala den yungores gyawa gyu gyawasa bala den yungore jero jesa dine zam dine gi gyu gyawasa yadi sule den yungorsen lamala den yungore jere.
Virtue is accumulated only in dependence on causes and conditions. Moreover, that virtue itself that is accumulated, that is the result of those causes coming together, it itself is also a cause. What results from virtue? Happiness. Wanting happiness, especially whether it's temporary happiness or lasting, stable happiness, this comes about in dependence on causes, and that cause is virtue. So both the temporary happiness of a good rebirth and all the conditions that mark a favorable rebirth, that form of temporary happiness comes about in dependence on causes, namely virtue or merit. And ultimate happiness, or happiness that is lasting and stable, the happiness of liberation and enlightenment, that supreme result, this too comes about in dependence on causes, and those causes are the same, virtue. And virtue, amongst its varying objects, but through which one accumulates virtue, the supreme is our teacher, our Lama.
And the Nashinda Soso Dinigi and Tarbada Tamjingibu Watoya Gewasawala, Lama de Leon Nashin, Dang Rangi, Shanley, Pembodri, Shan Simjan Tamjelia, Digituya, Shan Simjan Tamje Dunga Daje, Digituya Lea, and the Tarbada Tamjikibu Watoya, Gewachimalia, Hadami Watoyagi, Dinigi Shanley, Pembodriaki, Gewa, Shanley, Jupju, Pembodria, Sulit in the Yungos, Lama in the Yungur Hechere.
It's through relying on our teacher that we accumulate the causes, in other words, virtue, for happiness. We accumulate the causes that lead to the lasting, stable happiness of liberation and enlightenment. And thereby, we have accumulated the causes that we can help others in the most meaningful of ways, leading them to liberation and enlightenment. And how can we help others? Through relying on our teacher, and in that way developing skills and qualities within ourselves, and thereby expressing those skills and qualities that we are developing through relying on our teacher, we can act out those teachings by helping others achieve liberation and enlightenment too. So in other words, by relying on our teacher, we accumulate virtue, the cause of happiness, and through our own spiritual development and acting out what we have learned, we help others accumulate virtue as well. And this all comes about in dependence on relying on our teacher.
This is the Lama Yungore. And the Lama Ganas Yungore said, Lama Ganas Yungore Ladu, Tanga de Yang to some down the Kala, Ganas Yungore Lada, Anzugi, Bene, Chike. Shen Jawa Chima, Hada Mi Goban Toya said, and Jamro Chiche said, Lobsang Chökyi, Lamig Labje, Lama Zeling and the Chökyi, and Chi and the Chökyi Balatene, Zugi, Dombasoya, and Dombaso Lunga used to Nejo Dombo, Sembe, Dombasoya down, and Zig Zugi, and the Koala, Tarbase, Topo, Tabadon, Dumbakia. Dine and Lama Latine, Lamigi, Ma Sunje, Lama Latin, Shuba Latine, Jamba Comia, Ninja Comia, and the Jig, Janshu Semgoya Sada, Donyo to be Sheragoya, Sapajun Yamlejed, Lami, Lapche, Lamas and Ma Chu, Lami, Ma Ganang, Dikana, Latin, and Yamlin Jeta, Shingo, Mado, the Nigga Lamas and the Chumashina, and Nazugi, Shingo Marva, Meshinwa, Chesa Dine, Zangazugi, Jigge. Turim Soyada, and Jiki Jamba Comiada, Nijo Comiada, Nijung Comia, and Jam Nijo Comia, Janjo Semgo, Tonyo Tobe, Shera Comia, the Nigin Yamli Chazadi, Lamas in the Chu Shune, and Lamas in the Chu Sung, Lamas Chusung, Lamas in Chu Shu, the Sun and Arzugas, some that in Yamin Chita Shinore. The Nigi Dinichi do Shingu, Della Dene Arzugim, Nijo Comia, Jam Nijo Combi, De Kawasa Gorwa, Chazan Della Dene Arzu. Gyawachima Hada Miko Tovia, Gusegore, and Tarbatoya Gusegore, Sanjo Gobantoya Gusegore, and the Rangi, Shele, Pandoche, Guchazan Sagor. Just this Chazan, Lamigi, Palabje, Lamis and the Chu Shune, Madahaku Meva, the Dichazashin, Lamis and the Chu Shugo, Chu was a Chazan Lamis and the Chu Shuba, Latine, this Hago water. Dinner Hago Ballet, Yamin Jebalet, and Sosukula, Gawadi, Top Church drawer, and Tarbata Temji Kibo. To the Chagore. The needs are Lama de Sing Chotu, Lama the Gawasa Chasadi, the Nigger, Gawasa Chasa, Lama in the Yona, the dinner here.
The reason why it's so important that we're very clear on why our teacher, our Lama, is seen as the supreme field of merit. And this is because all the desired results we long for, which really come down to the attainment of lasting, stable happiness, these come about in dependence on our teacher. How so? Through receiving his teachings and his guidance in how to integrate those teachings within ourselves, as well as being an example of the teachings. We then can transform ourselves. So to ensure that in our very next rebirth, we once again attain a fortunate rebirth as a human or god and don't fall into the lower realms, this requires guidance from our teacher. We need to receive vows, we need to cultivate the mind of ethical restraint, and thereby, through restraining our mind, restrain our speech and our physical behavior too, from coming under the influence of the afflictions and creating non-virtue. Accompanying this, we need to cultivate further virtuous minds, such as love, compassion, and as well as wisdom, the wisdom realizing emptiness, as well as all six perfections. All of this comes about in dependence on our teacher. Our teacher imparts the knowledge to us, brings the text to life, clarifies the text, sets the living example, and guides us in how to integrate those teachings and encourages us to do so repeatedly over a sustained period. And in this way, We accumulate the causes for fortunate rebirth in our future lives, from life to lifetime. We accumulate the causes that will eventually lead to the attainment of liberation from suffering and enlightenment itself. And throughout the spiritual journey that we've embarked on, we cultivate, through relying on our Lama, ever greater qualities and skills so that we can be of ever more benefit to others. All of this comes about in dependence on relying on our teacher, which specifically means receiving teachings and then integrating them. So it's for this reason that our Lama is the supreme field of merit.
Sanji Kopan Toyale, Yamlin Chitan Shingore, Tarbai Kopan Toyale, Yamlin Chitan Shingore, Dishinba de Lamig and Shu, Lamig and Yamlin Rimbama, Lapchik, Lobtunje, Dinning, teachers or Tranche, Dinaji, Lamusumba, Yamlin Jebala, Dinner Topoza, and Lamadi, Nazuki. That Sunum saying Chotukuba, yes, that Tabata Tamji Kemba, and Toyaki, Kawasayaki, Chot Kubadi Lamalet in the Yungores. The down to Chudin Ruchi, Venam, Korakasi Javne, Kawal Sagordine, Chudin digging to Oda Dikon, Yamlan Digi or Digi or Sumarwa, Jazan Masona and Zushing Marwa, Dinaje, and Dinajing and Shelia, Simjan Durola, Sobadan and Mishandalia, Robache, Gochi, Robache, Pandoka Seven, Kawasagordine, Dizugi, or Tunadal. Yamlin did it or DJ or said, Del Lutin Chigumaro, Machine Waza, DK, some Yamlin Yagi Marwa, said that Denis and Hanzu in Yamlin, you are the Yagi to the yards, Lamalatin, Lamigma, Labjik, Lamig, Sumba, Delatin, as to do some Tadu Shigadu, and Hazuki, Taba to be Gusa, and Sanyoko to be Gusa to water, the negative. Toya Gusa Toga, the Lama de Yungo Bazada, Jimzen do some time, the Lama de Anzugi, the Chotu Be, Masasa Chimbo Shuji, Gawa, Chotu Giba Sayagida, the Jewu Chot, Digi Chot, Sanji Gopon, Ditobe Gudi, Lama Latin Sago Baza, Lama Latin Yungu Baza, the Lama de Masunam saying Chotu Giba, yes, I'll do see Jimzen, some Dana do she got Madada, since June Chotu Giba said. Das to Narangi, Lamazata Chotugubare said, Dizamaraco Jumsen, Dine sometime with Dine and Chotugubare Sungorwa.
In order to achieve spiritual goals, one first has to come to understand what goals are worthy of striving for. This means information is required. Mere information on what is possible is insufficient. One also needs to know how to train one's mind, how to transform one's mind. So one needs information and guidance in how to integrate that information, and just a sprinkling of the essence is insufficient. One needs detailed knowledge so that this can be integrated deeply within. And this can only be attained from our Lama. Whilst it certainly is virtuous to, for example, to circumambulate the stupa with a virtuous mind, this is good to do, and it will accumulate merit. But one's not going to receive too much spiritual advice while circumambulating the stupa. Likewise, it's important that we express our good qualities by helping others, by caring for animals, feeding animals, and so forth. But whilst these are good to do and need to be done, and they are, in terms of our spiritual development, an expression of our spiritual development. But such activities on their own, without ongoing guidance from our Lama, will not aid our spiritual development much. What is needed is teachings and guidance, ever more teachings, deeper guidance. And from our side, of course, the application of that, the integration of that, repeatedly over a sustained period, as well as the expression of the spiritual development, in this way, helping others. But this can only come about through relying on one's teacher, receiving teachings, and integrating them. So when you hearing these reasons, it should be abundantly clear why our Lama is precious or holy, why he's seen as venerable, why he is the supreme field of merit, why through relying on him we can create unsurpassable amounts of merit. So here again is an illustration of why one needs reasons to see why this particular point of the Dharma is the case, and not just a mere expression of words that one dutifully accepts, but for to transform oneself, to really appreciate and value the Lama. This comes about through relying on reasoning, and so too with other points of the Dharma.
직진비 롭장 천릭 롭장으로 지네 소소라랑 천릭배 야고 캐바 차발라 소소라나 천릭 야고 캐바 차발라야 가르고스네 천릭이 랍켄 천릭이인데 라리고로 천릭이인지 야고 랍켄지 메나 소소게 천릭 야고 신도 말해 다 소소라랑 천릭 캐바 차발라야 천릭이인 야고지 땡고고 대 기인들 때네 내 신고고래 다 소소라랑 천릭 야고 차지 미셸야 천릭 야고 라비아라야 소소라는 야고 셴 야고 판도 제발라 소소랑 신고고 소소랑 신외디 소소랑 게 랍켄 기엔지 땡제 라고마도 기엔디메나 천릭 시고 말와 제가 소소게 천릭 캐바 차야디 술리드는 용어도 천릭 랍켄 기엔델 때네 소소게 천릭 캐바 차도 고로와 어디나시 당한 저기다 디팅아도 지단걸 롭상이 들어와 디나시 아 저기 셈미토네 곰 냠len 제제 소수기 용모바 마빵야다 니는 아주기 기위 삼바디야 촌 야네 고네 고도 폐야기 디니기 두세 심기토네 냠 롭션 제야라 당아주기다 라마 아주기 최딩해다 데세 디 말랍제 디기 델레데네 아주기 신고바나 인고바자다 니거 자침부 그 초래사지 어두스네 제거로 제가 디네 장안의 천리글 롭션 제바네 아주 천리랍은 게인데 저기 천릭이 하고 싶어라 다디 남아도 초래 맞아다니 아직 칼라스야로다 안지게 아직 두아 되서야로도 아직 가시 어디라편다 저러봐다 근데 이내다 천릭 캐바 차야라 천릭 캐바 인지 거러봐다 디 나신지 샹다즈네 랍장 되서마다 칼라스야다 두아 되서 신야데 샹다즈네 랍야 신투바 연구를 돼 이내야 안에 천릭 나진 benenga 소야들라 강바 소야래 모자 소야래 안직디 칼라 소야디네 소야리디 가시게 잔다진 부주샤 용고를 되네 천릭 캐바 차야디 천릭 캐바 랍켄기 인지 쩌데 용고고로 와 비디 나신 지바를 당하죠.
Let's say a young person has an interest in science, and they think, wow, one day I'd really like to be a skilled scientist and engage in fascinating research. How are they going to become a skilled scientist? If they just rely on their intuition, on what feels good, they're not going to get very far. Rather, they will seek out a highly learned and teacher, a qualified scientist with a great education and reputation, and rely on them, go and study under their care and their guidance, and through great effort from their side, learning what is being presented, they too can become a skilled scientist. So this is the same for ourselves. To radically transform our way of thinking, to relate to people, to ourselves and the world in the way that it actually exists, requires a radical transformation, the uprooting of deep-held mistaken habits. And in that way, we can actually eradicate our afflictions and to look on the world with wisdom and with love. And this is done through relying on our Lama, our supreme field of merit, who guides us in our understanding of reality and the eradication of all forms of ignorance, as well as the cultivation of all virtuous minds such as love and compassion. This can only be done, such a deep-rooted, radical transformation, through relying on our teacher. In many walks of life, one can get by without being particularly educated. One can figure out how to cook something that's moderately nutritious and tasty, but one would not have the confidence to invite guests over, but one can get by. Likewise, one can learn how to drive and be a good enough driver. One wouldn't be able to repair one's car, but one could get by. But if one wants to be skilled in a highly specialized field, one has to rely on excellent guidance. And that so is very much the case with the radical transformation that is required for us to become enlightened.
지상 두스진의 두스징을 저게 삼다에 다 라마 띵아 저기 두스진의 냠nen체 림바티투 라마를 때는 연구요바다 지수지 심중다 삼다에 다 라마디 계침보인 바데 시고치가 저게 된디 제바체수 삼다의 라마데 배마서 계침보자 하고 두고 지상한테 럼림 나라 손에도 라마 띵비 팬 라마 마딘비 예믹 제가 지상 라마 띵바이나 라마 띵지 라미 진의 추유시 냠는 제반은 디스차상 냠는 제단 차상 신고를 해지 신신제는 것수 공nhập 야야 또 보고는 공도 페이도 소설에 이제 판도디 연구를 해지 자 마딘비 예믹 삼다에도 지다 라마 띵지 디자인의 추유시의 라마 마딘바는 라편지 매바나 디스차상 신 말에 마신바나 소설에 삼로 이야기 로투고마 삼로 이야기 말로나 띵기 대화디 탈바 탐지기 보고 톱투여요 말 디마선 소설을 용어라기도 와서 dine samdadu chi lama timbi dine pando chimbo yoba lama madenbaina sosulya ane chi sosulya gyongrak yoba dine ge samdadu chi chini chi samdadu kaba dine lama de ninjimi tingu tsa lama tinyagi donyergi dumbadi ligore donyer dumbo shukchimbo lidugore rasane dine lama ya lama yunden tong lama yunden tong lama le deba gitugore lama yunden matona lama le deba shukchimbo lidugore deba tuyas lebane dimbu yungu mare 지금 라면 연대도 라말에 대박이야 연구를 지금 니네 두시네 아주 니네 지금 잘라가리네 디기 연대인데 통해서는 딜모네나 디리에스 20타 템부실에 두고와 잘라 연대 마하나 미잔다 야고 열었는데 야고 열어 삼기네 한 가슴질에 어디 예나면 아스면 또 와서야 되는 연구로와 니네 전 두시데 삼다데 라마 괴비 김세 땡 괴비 라마 괴비 김자 가래 사다 되네 땡비 판에 마땡비 님이 사다 제산 두시나 zel물 침만나 디송다 디나데 다데 신슈 담마 지즈 라마라 사디기 데디나데 렘림 침베 나네 송야기 다 라마 땡 괴바 괴비 김세 라마 땡비 판에 라마 미테 라마 마땡바나 소소라 님이 사데 돈다디기 차산 디나를 주디어다 대칙지 통로 찍마도 요 말때 이내 돈다 계신 거래.
This text here is a summation of the key points in the Lamrim, certainly the section we're starting at now. So here we just have one verse, but those are one verse about relying on one's teacher. So depending on one's own history thus far in this life of relying on a teacher and thereby attaining inner transformation, depending on that, one will read the same verse and relate to it in a very different way. So those who have long relied on their teacher and have thereby gained great knowledge, they will have come to see the great value that their teacher has brought to their life. And they will read this one verse, and it will have a powerful impact on their mind because of their knowledge and guidance they've received and the transformation that has thus far brought about. Immediately, a heartfelt warmth towards their teacher, a yearning to continue to have this close connection will arise within them. So in the greater Lamrim texts, so not this way, there's just a verse, but in the varying Lamrim texts, such as the Lamrim Chemo, the great Lamrim, this section is not only presented as supremely important, the section on relying on your teacher, but a great many reasons are presented and why one should rely on one's teacher and the faults of not doing so. And this is important, and this is done for each of the sections in the Lamrim, and it's important to reflect on, or to come to know the benefits and the faults and to reflect on them, because it's through seeing the benefits of integrating a particular topic, such as relying on a teaching, and the faults of not doing so, that one will give rise to the determination to understand something well and to integrate it. And then in brief, the benefits of relying on your teacher is that you'll gather knowledge. And not just mere knowledge, but be trained in how to integrate that within oneself, and through his living example, be inspired to attain what he's attained, to become just like him. So this then will inspire us to not only continue to receive teachings, but to also meditate on them and do so, both of those activities repeatedly over a sustained period. And again, through studying in greater Lamaram text, we will understand the faults of not relying on a teacher, which is we won't gather knowledge. And not having gathered knowledge, we will have nothing to integrate, which means we'll stay in a state of confusion, of ignorant confusion, not knowing what is virtuous and how to cultivate it within ourselves, and what is non-virtuous and how to abandon it. And therefore, we'll continue in the same trajectory that we currently would otherwise be on, accumulating non-virtue and accumulating virtue which is weak. So seeing these benefits and faults, one will recognize how crucial it is to rely well on the teacher, and therefore how important he is in our lives. And we start by reflecting on his good qualities, because without seeing his good qualities for ourselves, it's very hard to give rise to faith of any power in him. It's just like if one is encouraged to buy something that is quite expensive and will take quite an investment of time to save the money, just merely being told by someone, oh, you should do that, is not going to lead to us investing the time to gather the money that is required. But if we come to see the great benefits of having this particular thing, we will then put energy into accumulating the wealth required. So too, with all the topics of the Lamaram, such as here, that of relying on the teacher. It's through relying on our teacher with sincerity that we will receive a knowledge and integrate that knowledge within ourselves, and thereby transform our minds, transform ourselves.
Dini gedang anzu lama de do chine gyumsen mangbo che so so ke wasaye ge kan lama de le tingu do so gyumsen samdang de den lama ya lama yuen den yo ba lama ya deba komya den lama ge so so le chue song che so so ge dini song a de be ma lama de ran le jin che ba de ke tin chi bu shu ri sam be ge da lama ge yuen den samda lama ya deba the ya da lama ge ran ya ane ke tin chen ma samda lama ya gu ba che ba ti chin deba dam gu ba du sku ne gomiade da diga so dustine ngaze nyamlenje deniko gomiade di chagore.
Again, just to emphasize the importance of utilizing reasons in our meditation, not just going with a feeling that arises, but utilizing reasons so as to deepen our conviction. And tonight I presented some, previous weeks when you've looked at this topic I've presented many. We need to reflect on the great qualities of our teacher, the kindness that he's shown us, and this will give rise to a sincere respect for him, for all that he has done to become the great being that he is, and thereby have the benefits in our lives that he can have. And in particular, when one comes to recognize the great value that he has for us, we can recognize that through relying on him, that this very life now, we can transform into a life of great meaning, rather than allowing it to be wasted as another unremarkable existence.
Da lama yuben denige soso ine lami dizene chushu dine nyamne che pe yagoria sanpe ge ngara ine soso rara ine gawa kumya soso ge jeba de ngat pe yago junsha sanpe nge di diring nge mi luden topje mi lu topje alama zalya chushu duchene soso ge gangdu ji de nyamne che pe yago resha sanpe ge dang di norm de yago shu resha soso ine soso le bobo ge soso rara ya odi yago junsha sanpe ge da 내가 지금 미션에 어떻게는 빼야고 제시하는 라와 나신 소소라리아 안디니 제도 빼야고 중시앙에 야고 중시아 선배가 디시아 선배가 등이 디니게 빼야고 제시하면 소소 가오고 미하다 아니 가오고 맞아 다딩이 되는 무퇴제 되는 제도에게 제기나 선배가 두스전에 삼다야게 뉘버게 삼다야게 나중에 두스전 계치 못 차고 그래.
Reflecting well and repeatedly on the great qualities of our Lama, as we looked at from verses, I think, 43, qualities of his body, speech and mind, and presented through looking at the Vinaya, the Mahayana, Tantra and so forth, as well as his great kindness. So all that was looked at in those preceding verses. This brings us to a point where great joy arises within us. Joy in our great good fortune. Recognizing that what could have been an ordinary life now has the potential to become an extraordinary one. And recognizing that this opportunity of having met such a remarkable being has not come about perchance, not by luck, but in dependence on causes that we have created throughout this and previous lives. This serves to give us a great confidence and deep felt inner strength of mind, recognizing that I've created the causes to have met this extraordinary being and to recognize who he is. Now that I've created through past great endeavors this opportunity, I cannot let it go to waste. I need to utilize whatever remains of this life well, relying on the teacher, through receiving teachings again and again and integrating them within myself. I must strive to use what remains of this life well, and I must strive to ensure that the result that I'm enjoying now, that has come from causes I have accumulated, I not only don't let it go to waste, but I accumulate further similar causes by continuing to rely on my teacher. For us now in English, the first line, the second in the Tibetan. Through the power of having made offerings and respectful requests. So here this is now, of course, as we can see, it's relating to our teacher as being the object, the supreme field of merit, to whom, in those previous verses, we've made offerings and respectful requests.
Chödan sansing kone, and Lama Chöpa Puja, and then Dubi Chöpa Puja, sansing Chöpa Puja, and this order, Chazan Lamalia, Ningur Shue, the sansing Chöpa, Lamigi Ma Sumba Nashing, Ganashing, Gatunia, Razing Yamin Chebada, Dubi Chöpa, Chazan Chöching, said Lamalia Chöpa Puja, Dubi Chöpa, sansing Chöpa Puja. And then Ngayo Kone, and then Gasor, Lamalia, Signambu, the Deva Dea. The Puya, the Jesa Chöching said the Sanjing Chopa Puya down, Dubi Chopa Puya, and then how you go and Dusi Puya, the Sungore.
Offerings and respectful requests are made in many ways. Offerings can be material offerings, offerings of service, and respectful requests. Then this relates to both one's physical behavior as well as one's speech, being respectful, polite, and one of praise, respect, and politeness.
Guibe said that Gushepche Lamaya, Gusheche Lamala Shepchu that in the shore, what the Guibe said in Chesna Church and Guibe said that, Chödan Sansi that the Negi, Nature to be Chobatan, Ning Tubata, Lu Yukone, and Lamala Gushepche, Shepchu Lasoba, on Dusine, Lamet, Dusin Lamaya, Densu Lamadusine, Joche or Essage.
So these really come together, both of offerings and respectful requests. So offerings done respectfully, offerings whether material or offerings of service, and service and assistance. And then in terms of one's physical behavior and verbal communication, this too, polite and respectful.
That's what they be to use, so what the war is. That's what Karta was in the Nigi, that Lamaya, Chik Dusine. Devatan Gubaje, this near Sevanache, and Lunga to be Chopuya, Nagi, Dua, and Jiggy, and Sansing Chopuya, Dini Chopinida. That's what the Karsota was. Lama Churung, Nashi, Lame Nashi, Kusun to Yundin, Dinashi, Elia, Diniki, Miculate, in the Kior Shosada. And it Lamigi, Jiggy, Lama Delating Sanji Kopan, Semja Tamjiki to Sanjo Kopan, New Toba. Toba Lamiki, and it Jiggy Naroche said that Jiggy dus Naroche said, Yalama, so at the war is, so at the war is, the war is, so at the be.
And the final word, that of requests. So these were made extensively in those that preceding block of verses, where with an attitude of respect, of trust or faith in our Lama, we made a variety of supplications which we can summarize as those self-same qualities that you, through great endeavor, have developed, qualities of body, speech and mind. Bless me to develop them too. Or to express that differently, rather than bless me, the meaning of that is guide me. Guide me so that I give rise to those self-same qualities that you have generated. The same exalted state of enlightenment that you have achieved, guide me to achieve that self-same state. All the good qualities that you have developed, guide me to develop those within myself too. And that then is the meaning of requests.
On so David, then delay our Gumbo King, Gishin Jesus in Virginia Lossedem. That delay our to do that Deva, that Leva, delay said it, down to get Yawachima Ladamiko, and delay said Tarbio delay. And then Tarbio dinner Chodo Gubadet, and the Sanjoko. That delay said dinner the Chasan Chudigore, just a delicate. Dini 탐주에게 다 딜레 탐제 다 딜레는 조 타바다 탐제 김비고 본 토에게 자와 라마 결혼해서 제대 딜레 자와 된 용기 자와 라마 공부 희니 결혼기 당아 제수 진제 네 제수가 제수 진제 아니 계신 제수 맞은 열로서 특제회 토네 특제 왕배 제가 예배 그 투자 왔으면 배 가신 구비 제외 돈에 가야 제수 진로지 제수 진제 아니가 미 규연 뒤들 라미 진이라로지에서 공부서는 다 뒤들어 델레단 대지 대화세디 탈바다 탐지kim바 토역이 대화세디 니 토백이 규계외 개화사에다 소라마 결혼되는 용거에서 공부세 뒤로 공부세 자 조어서로 고무슨 자와 델레 자와세 델레 탐지기 용세기 자와디 아니 라마 결혼한테 용거 라마 공부리에서 제가 탈바다 탐지 캠비 가서 코리 동학교인 탐지리 교벌집이 공부 라마 큐리에서 제가 탈바다 탐지 캠비 토비의 유 계획 자와사에게 대한 라마 결혼한테 용거를 제가 지내자 라마 큐기 계신 이배투 개비 토네 제외 제수 소정아 제수 진진제는 나 진이 나리아 진이라고 해서지.
And then the final two lines in the verse. Protectors and root of well-being and bliss, please bless me to come under your joyful care. The order of the Tibetans is a little different, but I'll go in the same order again presented. So well-being and bliss. This then are very expansive terms, and what they refer to here is all the temporary happinesses that are experienced in a life, as well as the fortunate rebirths in which they are experienced. So all forms of temporary happiness, as well as the lasting or ultimate happiness of liberation and enlightenment. So all of those forms are included in well-being and bliss. And the very root of that, such attainment, in particular, the supreme attainment of enlightenment, is you, my Lama. And then the term protector, perhaps here it's a correct translation, but here it can be better understood as an alternative translation of benefactor or master, in the sense of my root benefactor, my root masters doesn't work either. Let's say our root benefactor of well-being and bliss is you, our Lama. So that works better than protector, although the word is protector, but it has alternative meanings. And returning to him here, now we come to the fourth line, is please bless or inspire me, guide me to come under your joyful care. And joyful, of course, refers to the light and the bliss present in our Lama's continuum, in particular in relation to caring for his students in the most important of ways, guiding them to enlightenment, guiding them so they can not only attain more happiness themselves, but can also be of benefit, ever greater benefit to others. Hence, joyful, the joy and delight in the mind of our Lama. So here we are asking for inspiration, for blessings, and to be cared for him to come under his joyful care.
That Givishin Densugi that Dusine Yamling Jimbo Comnadi that it so to Sungor that or do now Donna sick Dudu Padushavana that Tarbatan Tamji Kimbiki Tobiaki Tobialia Gawa Sonam Sawore Chetan Sonam Sayadi Jingzo de Lama Chöpa in the Yungudus Carson Lamegi Ba Nala Chö Sung and Lamets in the Chu Shubaletine and Zugin Yamlen Cheta Hakudu Chetan Yamlen Jilrimba Dusin Jabaletine and Tarbata Tamji Kimber Toyagi Guzawati Jam Nije Chanju Semna and Tomba to be shared a parting to Yamla Sobata Nijun La Sobatinic Yamling and Surim Bendigo Sun Yamlen Rimbacha Lama Chöpa in the Mato Shen Lama let in the Mato Shen Yon to Mendo Chesa Dineza Lama Chöpa and the Shin Choto Giba Sunam Sayagi Tarva Tamjiki Gewasayagi Shin Choto Giba Lama Chöpa Sebiga that Lama Ben Masigi didn't get Zachimushu Chitire Lama Tebachi Duce that Lamegi Ducine Laming Anzol Duce Lapse Nangje and Anzol Ducin Yamlen Che Lama Ben Mas getting Chimbure Sambi getting Chimbure and Dinis Ducine Jenje na soso in Lamas and Dinigi didn't go up to Niki Rawat Bemas Yaburia Soso in Yamlen Che the Bay Yabu Sambi Soso in Gahokum on Ducine Gokum and the Gedina do the number of Lamegi Najesu Sanjiko Mato Yibado Lama Chökyi Jesu Zinje Lama Chözenani Chöshua the Diniki Yamlenche did Rawa Lamejin Laroche said don't have this word that they don't have new dution did it.
This one verse has covered a vast presentation, and it is the very first stage of training on the path, that is relying on one's teacher. So the meaning in brief is, in order to attain a state freed of all suffering, liberated from the sufferings of samsara in its entirety, and in particular the state of enlightenment, we need virtue. We need vast stores of virtue. And we need to accumulate that as quickly as possible. And to do so, the supreme field in which we can accumulate virtue is through relying on our teacher. Our teacher, our Lama, is the very root of all virtue that we will accumulate. And this is because he teaches us. He guides us in how to integrate what he is teaching, and he sets the example of a being who has done so. He teaches us the great importance of ethical restraint and how to restrain our mind through developing an ethical outlook, a mind not overwhelmed by the afflictions. He trains us in how to generate love and compassion, to love all beings equally, to be compassionate for all beings equally, to be generous in spirit towards others, wanting to give of ourselves to others, to benefit others. And in dependence on these trainings, he trains us in patience, a mind that is undisturbed in the face of adversity, a mind that readily gives of oneself to others and stays peaceful and calm in the face of adversity, dominated by love and compassion, as well as wisdom. And wisdom is the further training he trains us in, not, as with all of them, not merely an imparting of knowledge, but how to cultivate, generate that within ourselves. So all of this knowledge, as well as its integration, comes about solely in dependence on the guidance of our teacher, who brings to life the meaning of a text, who shows us the result of training in what is presented in the text. So reflecting like this, you need in your meditation to come to the conclusion of recognizing how truly fortunate we are to have made this connection, how truly fortunate we are that over the past lives we have accumulated these causes, and rejoice in what we've attained, rejoice in what we have done to achieve this. To generate a joyful mind in all that one has attained, and thereby commit to continuing to accumulate ever more such causes.
Dine Zadang Juge de Shevana Chide, Dang Juge Lamadi, Sunam Sepishin, Chodu Gubare, Sai Patient Sumada, Chodu Bare, Sunguda, Chodubare, Sambege, the Devatizam Maimba, Kokumsin Samda, Chodu Gubaim, Gumten, Gares to Tishi Shevana, Chevache, Chesanga Kawasa, Lama Letine Kawakan Sagore, Chesan Kaniskari Yungore, Stu, Shimbuche, Chide, Lama Letine, Juge Jamni Jokomiada, Nejunga, Chasan Lama Letine, how go about how say which how go and do. Then when there are some dingy when there are Ishiji Kigora, Chesa Dinikine, that Ishidi and Doya Dodo Meba Sagore. Just so how would never near Seme Migi, Seme Tongje, never never in and Lama Deba Dodo Meba Leada, Lamaya getting Chimbo in by the tin head, Dodo Meba, and Doa Meba Litgore. Chesa Dinisa, then Denigi Gumse and Matong Bena, Debarache, and Lamsa, and Mishandaji, or they did the unit did Choyamar Lamna, Lamsa Deba Dorje in Yangore. Chesa so get Seme ever Yena. Dortuya Yomar. Just two didn't never didn't hang Lord Ranshin, or some time or Ranshin, Yokorong, and the chick is Debadan Kubadi Leomore. Penang Mix Sungub Jewe Delia, and a Puchungala, Amigi, Pamigil, Chick Leguro, Meet the Nature Sungut, Yabu Tapu Majan, Meet Choladone, Kangachimuti says Leguro. Then I said Lamsa, Chikduava, Chick Leguban, Lamsa Lava. The Dennis Mick the guy get Hubstang do I watch and Lamsa, me Doshu and Lamsat in a guard, or that it Nazils now Bukuno or Gumidua, that me Doshu thing a lava water, some Dangumidua, then the Yoxid Lamsan Lapa Gayada, Lamsatica to Gaya Lido, the little Hengi, Horashi, Lansa got Leondo, some of them was Leondo, the Nick Leondo. She's a little Hengi to Gomshi, you tell us Hengi Leondo. Jesan Dinashi, you could do some that Chepa and do something, and simply little Hengi or Lamsa, some Tangi, Jim Hodge Lamsa, Dinigi, Chigel, Lama Java, Lamig, 10 Turba, Jamma Lamsa, Lama, Debatia, Gushapia, that she live, just that to Gomshi, the Geshimucha. That then I also Gomshi Madeva, Dumble, Summer, Tamangura, Jiji, or then the Chesa Denigi. Java do so Gumde some Gumde Yawa Hagone and the Javana the Chigia which I got Timbulate or Regere, and the Nining body did it watering.
Again, I want to emphasize the need to hear teachings so as to gather information and then integrate that information in meditation. Because it's through this process of using reasoning that deep transformation will come. So we're looking at this one topic, but it applies to all the topics. Because here it's presented, the Lama is the supreme field of merit. And if one accepts that, then very good. But that doesn't lead to much transformation. We need to understand what is virtue, we need to understand why we need to accumulate it, and how to accumulate it. That's all knowledge. So that knowledge, we only gather in dependence on a teacher. And then when we take all these other points that are presented tonight and in the preceding talks on relying on a teacher, and you reflect on these again and again, and you come to recognize from deep within how valuable one's teacher is, the great impact he is having on one's life, and the incredible transformation that will come about through continuing to rely on him, one will give rise to a recognition of his importance with a valid cognition. And when one gives rise to a realization of any type with a valid cognition, we give rise to faith, or alternatively translated as trust, a trust that is unshakable. And this is imperative for any topic, but so too here. Because with unshakable trust in our teacher, we will not easily be swayed by others. Someone who criticizes our teacher says, oh no, there's a new one over there. They will not harm our faith. But this only comes about in dependence on reasoning, not mere blind trust, blind faith. And the second key point to make, the first was about the need to use reasoning in meditation. The second is, so this word meditation is equally translated as habituation or familiarization. So those words, habituation and familiarization, show the need to repeatedly engage in the same meditation over a sustained period. Because that is how we create habits. That's how we become familiar with something. So if we take an illustration of a young child, a young child is totally reliant on their parents and their caregivers. So a young child does not know what are signs of danger. Their parents, their caregivers, will teach them. They'll say, if someone has a particular expression or tone of voice, be careful. And then they will learn this, and they will thereby be able to protect themselves. And if they face a situation they now have learned may well be dangerous, they'll immediately raise their hand to protect themselves. They have no way of knowing the motivation of the person before them. They have no way of knowing what is going on in their mind and whether they are an actual danger. But instinctively, because they have been trained well by their parent, they'll raise their hand to protect themselves. So this instinctive response is what we're looking to develop in meditation. Through meditating well on the kindness and qualities of our Lama, naturally, instinctively, we will have an attitude of respect and devotion. No matter what his facial expression or tone is, naturally, we'll want to be in his presence in order to receive teachings, not just for a joyous feeling, but in order to receive teachings so that we can continue to integrate them through reflection, through meditation. So that, in brief, is what we've looked at tonight. And I just wanted to emphasize those two key points: on using reasoning in meditation and the need to repeatedly meditate on each topic, because that is how transformation comes about.
And Jamadina Denma, the Kosuare, because the Tenju Lutin said the Cheboda and Chizachibo Yimbadida and Chike and Jimidaba, the Gorma, the Chigligore. So
thank you very much. Then next week we'll continue with the next verse, where we come to look at this human rebirth and its incredible value and potential, but that it's in its nature, it is impermanent and will not last. So thank you. Then we'll continue there next week.